Hi everyone, I am back. Allison Kinnear here, and today I want to talk about toxic positivity. Now, you may be thinking, how can positivity be toxic? I mean, don't we want to stay positive in life and have a bright, optimistic outlook? Isn't that kind of the purpose of life? And I would say, yeah, that's part of it. The question becomes, like, I know for me, I want to live a life that is filled with growth and abundance and joy, and I want to have all of those things. The problem comes when life throws you challenges, when you confront your fear, when you confront your shame, when you confront anger, when those things show up. What do you do then? Do you lean into the anger, fear, and shame and try to learn from it? Do you get stuck in the anger, fear, and shame and sadness? Or do you try to avoid it? Are you trying to say, nope, I'm going to keep my high vibe and I don't allow those thoughts to come in. I don't allow those words to come in. I don't allow those feelings to come in. That is toxic positivity, right? So we don't want to get stuck in our fear and anger. We know so many people who can get really trapped in fear and anger and shame, and it is unhealthy and unproductive living. But I would also argue that trying to block out any shame, anger, fear, sadness that you're experiencing and being like, I'm just not going to allow that to come in. I'm just going to try to focus on the positive and I'm going to pretend this isn't here. That is called toxic positivity. And I would argue that is equally as damaging and harmful as being consumed in the negativity. Maybe not equally, but it's pretty darn close. So to me, my definition of toxic positivity is when you create barriers to avoid feeling vulnerable. Because what that fear and shame and sadness is an invitation into your vulnerability. And toxic positivity is when we shut it all out and go, not going to feel it. I'm not going to go there. And a lot of people will say, well, I want to manifest good things in my life. And so I'm never going to allow myself to feel anything negative. But that is not where true healing lies. I love talking about the dark stuff. I love talking about the fears and the anger and the shame and the sadness. And the reason why is because it's real and because it's helpful. Avoiding it, avoiding leaning into that vulnerability, avoiding those things actually creates more pressure. It actually does not release you from its grips. It does. I would argue it doesn't help you with manifesting what it is that you're wanting. What it actually is doing is it's putting up more walls and barriers and blocking and creating more fear, because then you have the fear that's there, but then you have the fear about the fear. You have the fear about the shame, the fear about the sadness, fear that if you let it in, it's going to consume you and you're going to be stuck. And maybe that's because you've been stuck before. Maybe you've experienced feeling trapped, like you can't get out of it. But I would argue that's probably because you didn't have a lot of skills or support or help or resources to help you not get stuck, but to actually move through it. There's a Buddhist saying that I love that says, no mud, no lotus. No mud, no lotus. Toxic positivity is when you're focusing only on the lotus and ignoring the mud. But the problem is that lotuses don't bloom in water, in clear, shining water. They bloom in the mud. And we need to figure out how to make our mud fertile. So my strategy that I always talk about is we need to compost our rot. The pain that comes into our lives, the grief that comes into our lives, the fear that comes into our lives, the shame that comes into our lives, the sadness that comes into our lives. How do we turn that rot into fertile, ground, into compost? How does it richen our soil? Because toxic positivity, if anybody knows anything about composting needs air. It needs to be turned. It needs to be moved. If you just put all your rot on top of each other, it will stink. It will become anaerobic, and it will not become compost. Compost needs tending to. It needs turned over. It needs to cultivate heat so it can be transformed into compost. And that's what we have to do with the shame and the pain and the guilt and the fear that comes into our life. We actually have to move it. We have to turn it over. We have to create some heat involved in it so that it can become fertile soil for our lives. So how do we do that? We trust that we're going to be okay. This process is not necessarily going to be fun, right? But it will be transformative. We have to look at it. We have to lean into it. We have to feel it. We have to go there. We have to go into the vulnerability. We have to go through the shame, go through the anger, go through the sadness, not avoid it, but actually move through it. And when we can move through it in a productive way, in a healing way, then we don't get trapped and we don't build up that tension trying to avoid it at all costs. We can actually transform it so that our ground is fertile. We can actually, you can actually find a way where what was eliciting all that fear or eliciting all that shame isn't there anymore, because your lotuses are blooming, because your ground is fertile enough. It can handle some of the weeds and they become easier to pick out. But we can't get to that place by avoiding our vulnerability. It can only be achieved by leaning into it, and I would argue leaning into it productively. So if this speaks to you, I just want to say, please, when you are doing the toxic positivity, it is spiritual bypassing. It is silver lining other people's pain. It does not work. It is not productive. Instead, we really need to compost the rot and the shit in our lives. Okay. If you like this, please comment, share. It helps people find me and my work. Anything that you do really does support the work that I do. And around it makes the algorithms happy. So make the algorithms happy. And if you're interested in my work and being supported as you compost the shit in your life, you can find out more about my work here at AllisonKinnear.com. Thank you, and I'll see you next week. Bye.